Greetings and blessings, YouTube. This is John the Jansenist, and this is going to be the beginning of a new series that I'm going to be doing that I will be titling Confessions. And for those of you that are of a Augustinian persuasion that are subscribed to my channel, this will be basically a similar endeavor to the one which St. Augustine took upon himself when he wrote his own Confessions, which have since become a very important resource for any growing Christian who wants to better understand the message of the gospel. It is the function of tradition and of the testimony of past Christians in our real historic faith that strengthens and defines who we are. It is not a substitute for the revelation that we have been given in Scripture and should no way be treated as superior to it. However, it is a very good and necessary subordinate thing which allows us to continue to grow in faith and to be corrected from error. And so with this in mind, I'm going to be giving my own testimony of my own life. And where this will differ with St. Augustine's Confessions is that mine will be done via stream of consciousness, therefore they will be not written in the lovely and poetic fashion that he wrote his in, which I'm sure was the result of many hours upon hours of deep thought and contemplation with pen and paper in hand. And just for everybody's recognition, I am also going to be posting this on my primary channel, which is a non-religious channel, just to give some of my subscribers on my other channel a bit of a more intimate understanding of exactly who I am and where I'm coming from. And I'm going to start this testimony in medias res, which in Latin means in the middle of things. It was around my 17th or 18th year when I experienced, which I believed to be at the time to be a loss of faith. I had been brought up in a family that was the result of a union between a apathetic Catholic father who had drifted to a couple of different churches since, and an Anglican/American Episcopal Church mother. Both of my parents are from largely Irish extract, my father's side of the family being more of the green Irish nationalist variety, my mother being more of a progressive and pro-unity with Britain sort of mindset. And on my mother's side, there was also a good bit of other cultures mixed in as well, particularly French, Celtic, small amount of German, Scottish, and some Native American also, particularly the Lakota Sioux peoples of the Minnesota and Dakotas area of the Midwestern United States. I had been raised in the Anglican faith. I was catechized and confirmed as an Anglican. And as an Anglican, I accepted at face value the testimony of the gospel and the gospel message as it was understood by the prelates of the Anglican Church here in America, which is a very diluted and liberalized understanding of the gospel that has allowed for a multiplicity of opinions, many of them erroneous. Indeed, if you look at the historic faith of the Anglican Church, you see a threefold conflict between Calvinistic thinkers, Arminian thinkers, and a third party that is somewhere in the middle. Generally orthodox in nature, but basically the sort of let's all get along with each other conciliatory party. I was essentially educated in a church that taught that third mindset, which was that we don't really have an official opinion regarding the debate between limited atonement and unlimited atonement. Therefore, the notion of, is God's grace sovereign or is it conditional? But it was around the end of my time in public school in 12th grade, where after many years of education in naturalistic thought and in Darwinian evolution, that I came to the conclusion that talk of an afterlife, life beyond death, a spiritual nature, all of that was not reality. I at first began as an apathetic non-believer, something along the lines of a live and let live agnostic. During my time in college, I drifted back and forth from being a misanthropic, hardline atheist who despised all things religious, and a sort of happy-go-lucky, live-loose, occasional Buddhist, depending on which crowd of people I was running with. In that time, I was exposed to all sorts of different philosophies, modes of thought. The entire American university system is, in essence, a sort of cesspool of differing ideas. Coherence is not something that's really high on the priority list of most educational bodies, particularly at higher learning levels, particularly when it comes to philosophy, theology, and so on and so forth. At that point, I wasn't interested in theology, but there were courses being offered, at least, dealing with it from a historical standpoint. This time period of ambiguity with regards to my beliefs continued until my early 20s. It was actually in the recent aftermath of the September 11th attacks that I started to give religion some serious consideration again. And at first, my interest began with simple curiosity. I read a number of things by various authors defending many different religious takes, some of them Western ideas, some of them Eastern ideas. I wasn't really so much interested in a particular school of thought on this matter. I just simply came back into the general idea of considering the general idea of universal law and an afterlife. But through my readings at that particular time, I eventually came to a conclusion, and it took me many years of pondering the nature of humanity in general that I came to this conclusion. And this was the conclusion that ultimately led me to where I am now. And the particular subject that I was concerned about was one that had been brought to my attention particularly by the event of September 11th, which was the notion of death. For most naturalistic thinkers and other secular humanists, and even a good number of religious people, death is viewed not as something unnatural or irregular or not right, but it's considered a natural event and a companion that walks the path of existence alongside life. For most of my life, both as a ill-informed Anglican and then later as an unbeliever, I viewed death as being natural. I took for granted the notion that I feared it and that I didn't want to experience it. Even though at many a time I was very messed up intellectually and I harbored some ill will towards the general concept of the human race and thought that maybe the world would be better off without it, I never really could get to the point where I said that life was so bad that death was actually something that I'd want to experience. I never had suicidal inclinations the way other YouTube Christians, particularly Venom Fang X, did during his time as an atheist. I can't really say why it was at the time, but I always, at an innate level, believed that there was something about death that was different, that didn't fit with everything else. And over time, I began to associate certain other things with death, certain things that most of humanity generally considers to be unethical modes of living or improper practices, such as killing, stealing, and various forms of sexual misconduct. Adultery was actually one of the last things that I ended up considering, because adultery was something that I saw a lot of, particularly when in college. People got married young, and people became unfaithful within a short period of time. Rape, incest, pedophilia, those things were more on my radar at the time. But I never really had an understanding of why I thought these things were wrong. I just did. I accepted the belief of people like Richard Dawkins that our notions of compassion and morality are simply accidents of the evolutionary process, and that although they don't seem conducive to the notion of a self-grasping race such as the human race, they nonetheless are a part of who we are. But the issue of death in particular continued to haunt me. And eventually, at one point, it was around the time that I began to reconsider becoming recatechized as a Christian, that I came to a simple realization, one that generally flies in the face of what most people in modern society think. And that is that death is unnatural, that death is a curse, that there's something wrong with it, that it shouldn't be. There's nothing empirical that I can point to explain this belief. Indeed, all empirical data suggests that this is what happens, therefore it's natural. And indeed, I became obsessed with David Hume's notion of the idea of the naturalist fallacy, which was that because something appears to be natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or ethical. And although I don't recall ever reading anything by him that suggested that we should treat such things as death, which is something that's certain for everybody in the end, in this light. But I began to. So Hume, to a certain extent, influenced this conclusion, but I wouldn't call him the direct cause of it, because it was a conclusion that he never reached. And I don't think he would have applied his notion of a naturalist fallacy to that particular aspect of life. But I began to. There is something about death which disturbs us. When a loved one passes, for some of us, even when someone that we've never met has been killed or has had their rights violated in some distant land, either at the hands of some other government or by our own government, we have, for the most part, with the exception of certain people whose consciences are seared, we have a gut reaction that says that this is wrong, that this is bad. We don't like it. But many of us would just assume, even though we don't like it, that's where it ends. We can't really raise any more objections other than this. And the beginning of my rediscovery of Christianity really comes back to this basic premise. Death is a curse. There's something wrong with it. That concludes tonight's confession. I thank you all for listening, and I look forward to your comments. And until next time, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, God be with you all.